I was walking home from work, taking the usual shortcut through the park. The sun had just set, casting long shadows and bathing everything in that eerie twilight glow. Normally, I enjoy these walks. They're my time to unwind and let my mind drift. But that night, something felt off. It was too quiet. The usual chatter of birds and rustle of leaves were conspicuously absent, as if everything was holding its breath. About halfway through the park, I noticed someone sitting on a bench ahead. Not unusual, except they seemed odd, even from a distance. I could tell they were staring straight at me, not moving, not even seeming to blink. As I got closer, I tried to make out more details, but it was like my brain couldn't focus on them. It was a man, I think, but his features seemed blurry, indistinct. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just some guy enjoying the evening, probably lost in thought. I decided to nod a greeting as I passed, the polite thing to do. But when I was about 10 feet away, he suddenly stood up. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" His voice was normal, friendly even, but it made my skin crawl. "Yeah, sure is," I managed to reply, picking up my pace. I don't know why, but I didn't want to turn my back on him. Something inside me screamed that it was a bad idea. So I started to edge around him, keeping my eyes fixed on his face, which was still a blur. That's when he said, "You shouldn't be alone out here. It's not safe." Alarm bells went off in my head. I mumbled some excuse and bolted. I didn't look back until I was out of the park, expecting to see him chasing after me. But there was no one. I got home, locked the door behind me, and tried to laugh it off. I was overreacting, I told myself. It was just some weirdo in the park. But later that night, I heard something that chilled me to the bone. From outside my window, clear as day, came the same voice. "It's not safe." I didn't sleep a wink, jumping at every little sound. In the morning, I convinced myself it had to be a dream. I was stressed, overworked, imagining things. To avoid the park, I took the long way to work. The day was uneventful, but as I left the office, my heart sank. The streetlights were out, plunging my usual route home into darkness. With no other choice, I started walking, jumping at shadows, my heart racing. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, keeping pace. I turned around, nothing. I walked faster, they sped up. I broke into a run, and so did they. I was about to scream for help when I tripped and fell hard. Bracing for the worst, I looked up, but there was nobody there. The footsteps had stopped. I was alone on the street. Shaken, I picked myself up and hurried home. Since that night, I've never seen the blurry man again, and I've never heard the footsteps or his voice. And I never take shortcuts through the park anymore. I've always prided myself on being rational, a person who doesn't jump at shadows or get spooked by the unknown. That all changed after an incident that happened a few months ago. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which means late nights in front of the computer screen are a norm for me. It was one of those typical nights. The clock had just chimed 3 a.m., and the world outside my studio apartment was as silent as the dead. That silence was broken by a sudden, sharp knock at my door. My first thought was to ignore it. Who in their right mind would visit at this hour? But then, another series of knocks, more insistent this time, echoed through the small space. With a mixture of annoyance and curiosity, I got up from my desk and peered through the peephole. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was a woman, her back to me. She was dressed in what looked like a hospital gown, her hair a tangled mess. "Can I help you?" I called out, not opening the door. She didn't respond, just stood there. That's when the unease set in. Something about her posture, The way she was completely still, it felt off. "Are you okay? Do you need me to call someone for you?" Again, no response. I was about to turn away, write off the encounter as some weird middle-of-the-night anomaly, when she suddenly turned around. Her face was pale, eyes wide and staring right into mine, as if she could actually see through the door. She whispered something, but it was too low for me to catch. Then, louder, "They're coming." Chills ran down my spine. "Who's coming?" But she was gone. Just like that. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty, no sign of her ever being there. I couldn't sleep after that. The woman's words echoed in my mind, a warning, or was it a threat? The next day I asked my neighbors if they'd seen anything, but no one had. It was as if the woman had vanished into thin air. A week later, the news broke. A patient had escaped from the local psychiatric facility the night of my visitation. She was found safe, but what chilled me to the bone was learning her reason for escaping. She was convinced that an entity was after her, something she referred to as them. Since then, strange occurrences have become a part of my life. Items moving on their own, shadows flitting just out of sight, and a constant feeling of being watched. Each anomaly, each unexplainable incident feels like a validation of the woman's warning. I've started to research, diving into forums and obscure texts, trying to understand what might be happening. The more I learn, the more I realize how little we know about the world around us. Last year, I moved into a small apartment in a less than stellar part of the city. The rent was cheap, and being fresh out of college, I didn't have many options. The building was old, with creaky floors and thin walls, but it was what I could afford. My neighbors kept to themselves, and I did the same, a silent agreement of mutual disinterest. One evening, after a long day of job hunting, I returned to my apartment only to find a note slipped under my door. It was crudely written, demanding a sum of money be left in a nearby alley if I wanted to stay safe in my new home. Thinking it was a sick joke by some bored kids, I crumpled the note and threw it away. 2 days later, my apartment was broken into. They didn't take much. Some cash, an old watch, nothing of real value, because I didn't have much to begin with. But the message was clear. The note wasn't a joke. I reported the incident to the police, but without any leads or evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Feeling vulnerable and angry, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I bought a cheap security camera and set it up to face the front door. If they decided to come back, I'd be ready. Weeks passed without incident. Maybe the break-in was a one-time thing, I hoped. Then, one night, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the security camera at an ungodly hour. Half asleep, I checked the live feed, expecting to see a stray cat or a drunken neighbor. Instead, I saw a man at my door, masked and holding what looked like a crowbar. He was working on the lock, unaware he was being filmed. My heart raced as I dialed 911, whispering my situation and address to the operator. The man got the door open and stepped inside, still masked. The police arrived minutes later, but it felt like hours. They caught him red-handed, literally inside my apartment. The guy turned out to be part of a small gang that targeted people in the area, especially those new to the neighborhood, exploiting their vulnerability. I've never really been one to believe in the supernatural. Ghost stories and horror films were more amusing to me than terrifying. That was until last summer, when something happened that I still can't explain, and it's turned my skepticism on its head. I was house-sitting for my aunt and uncle who live in this old farmhouse way out in the sticks. The nearest neighbor is a good mile away, so you can imagine how isolated it feels, especially at night. They were off on a 2-week cruise, so I had the place to myself. It was supposed to be an easy gig, feed the cats, water the plants, and enjoy the solitude. The first few days were as peaceful as I expected. I spent my time reading, watching TV, and taking long walks in the surrounding woods. However, things started to get weird around the 4th night. I was woken up by the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom door. Thinking it was one of the cats, I called out, but the footsteps didn't stop. They paced back and forth, slow and deliberate. I remember feeling frozen in bed, listening until the sound eventually faded away. By morning, I had convinced myself it was just the house settling or some other rational explanation. But then it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Always at the same time, just after 2 a.m. The footsteps became a nightly occurrence, and each time I would lie there, too scared to move until they stopped. I started to dread the coming of night. I tried staying up late, hoping to catch whoever, or whatever, was walking outside my room, but sleep would eventually claim me, and the footsteps would wake me. One evening I was watching a movie with all the lights on, trying to keep my mind off things when I heard a soft thud from upstairs. The cats were with me in the living room, so it wasn't them. Heart pounding, I grabbed a baseball bat and went to investigate. I searched every room, every closet, and found nothing out of place. On my way back downstairs, that's when I saw it. The door to the basement was ajar, just slightly, but I was sure I had closed it earlier that day. Approaching it, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air felt colder, heavier, as I reached out to push the door open fully. The basement was pitch black, the only light coming from the staircase behind me. I flicked the light switch by the door, but nothing happened. The bulbs must have been out. Taking a deep breath, I decided to brave the darkness, thinking maybe a window had been left open and was causing the weird occurrences. I had barely taken 2 steps down when I heard it, a whisper so soft I could barely make out the words, but it sounded like my name. That was the last straw. I bolted back upstairs, slammed the door shut, and shoved a chair under the knob. I didn't sleep at all that night. When the sun came up, I packed my bags, left a note for my aunt and uncle explaining that I had to leave unexpectedly, and I didn't stop driving until I was back in the city. Thank you for watching. If you found these stories gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling content. For another hair-raising tale, check out our suggested video. And if you're hungry for more eerie encounters, dive into our playlist featuring similar chilling narratives.